Hello everybody, so my last two videos were pretty long and I would be shocked if this were an exception. It took me quite a while to write this. I've mentioned before, in my previous video I had loads of notes, and this time I had even more notes, but admittedly this time I do think that I'll get through those notes quite quickly, because some of the notes are literally it's going to take me basically just a second to say them. But basically, a lot of this, I should stress, you might be wondering, well, what is this? And I should say right out the gate, this is not really about the politics of curriculum reform. And by politics, I kind of mean like identity politics stuff. If this was about, for example, the teaching of like gender identity in schools, this would be something on the main channel. This is going on this channel because it's sort of just like my general thoughts about how it makes sense to structure what children are being taught in school, what kind of things they should be being taught. And again, like I say, relatively kind of apolitical in my presentation of that. I mentioned previously, I can't remember exactly how long ago, that if I could be in charge of one aspect of the government, again, I've said if I could, I would pick all of it. But if I had to be in charge of one thing, it would probably be education, because I actually find interesting, the kind of role that education has of raising the next generation, and what kind of things do you want to teach the next generation, what kind of values do you want to bestow, and things like that. And that's why I want to talk about that in this video. And I should say this will be very much focused on my own personal experience of education and what I think could have been improved. This, I can imagine, would be not only highly subjective, but also it might be that people have like literally objective experiences of where things that I'm saying might actually not hold water or be valid across the entire world or even the entire country. But this is my experience, and I felt like making this video, so it's just going to happen. But before that, I should just provide for some context to those who are not from the UK, a brief explanation of the way that kind of like the British education system is kind of divided up, because I'm going to use some of the main terms quite frequently. So it's just worth bearing in mind what those terms are. And the big term you'll probably want to know if you're not from the UK is key stages. So in the UK, we talk about education being divided up into key stages. There's key stage 1, which goes from basically year 0 to year 2, roughly from like 4 until 6 years old, that is. And then there's key stage 2, which goes from year 3 to year 6, so from 7 till 10. And then you have key stage 3, which goes from year 7 to year 9, 11 to 13. And then you have key stage 4, which goes from years 10 to 11, or 14 to 15. I should say, again, this is based on my experience as somebody whose birthday is in the summer, and therefore I actually, if your birthday was, for example, way back in the autumn in like October, well, then actually you would experience most of these different years, a whole year in terms of your life before me. So you would experience year 11 when you are 16, as opposed to me, who experienced when I was 15. That's how school years work, just in case. I assume that's a universal thing. And also I should just say that, just for the record, that in the UK, usually you have primary school, which is key stages 1 and 2, and then you have secondary school, which is key stages 3 and 4. Pretty simple. And GCSEs, the General Certificate of Secondary Education, is done throughout key stage 4, and that is your compulsory education. So So for me, I could have actually left school at 15. I had already done, by May, I'd already done all of my GCSEs. I was done with that. At 15, I could have started looking for work, and that would have been perfectly legitimate. Interestingly, after I left, they actually, I think due to employment, or maybe just because the idea of children being able to go out into the world and look for work at 15 seemed, I don't know, a little bit like antiquated. It sounds like one of those things that you could imagine like people would have done back in the 1800s, but like the idea of people leaving school at 15 now to go out into the workforce maybe seems a bit strange. So now they have a system where basically you either have to do an apprenticeship or go to college, which is kind of like a kind of training school. Like a lot of people, for example, who maybe learn to do, say, hairdressing, will learn hairdressing at college. College is used in several different senses in the UK. It's used either for that, which is basically an immediately post Key Stage 4 higher education, usually in some kind of vocation, or college is also used to describe the kind of subdivisions of a university. So if you're at a collegiate university, you might go to a particular college at that university. But yeah, basically, and then the alternative is, of course, you could go to sixth form. And sixth form is confusingly named because you could be like, well, hold on, it's Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, sixth form. The reason why it's called sixth form is because it used to be that instead of what's now called year 7 through to year 11, it was first year through to fifth year, meaning that after fifth year, you have sixth form. I don't know why it's sixth form. The whole thing's a bit of a mess. This is why I felt the need to just explain some of this stuff, because I thought it would be, even though I'm not going to reference a lot of this stuff and I'm not even going to get into sixth form in this video at all, I still think it was just worth saying, because it would seem like if I was going to refer to like key stages, you might be like, well, what the hell's a key stage? And I kind of felt like I just had to put everything else in place in order for it to make sense. Anyway, at sixth form, you do A-levels, and A-levels are the thing that mostly determines what kind of university you go to. GCSEs aren't really as important. I think a lot of job applications will say like you need to have 5 A to C GCSEs, A to C meaning pass grade. And often, you will have things that say like you need to have, say, something in maths, but generally speaking, it's kind of shocking how little GCSEs actually matter. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure exactly what GCSEs I got. I know I got a decent smattering of kind of A's and B's. Not very many A stars at all, by the way, so apparently I'm an idiot. But yeah, basically, A stars are just A pluses. It's just an unnecessary thing. Oh, and never mind the fact that now they don't even do letters anymore. It's numbers. And I also think, kind of, to me, counterintuitively, the higher the number, the better the grade is. So I think the highest grade now is a 9. And to me, it's kind of like the letters was like going down. So A, or if you know what I mean. So like the lowest letter, if you will, is the best grade. So it kind of makes sense that the lowest number would be the best grade. But no, I don't know. It's all quite confusing. So there we go. That's your basic primer on the structure of the British education system. But I do want to talk about something which I want to change, because I don't really care about changing any aspect of that structure particularly. But what I do want to talk about is, of course, I have spoken, by the way, about how I would change the structure of university quite dramatically, and I've already made a video on that. So I guess that does mean that now, seeing as I'm not really planning on talking about kind of the sixth form period, 16 to 17 to 18 years old, it's just going to be something that's left unmentioned. But basically, the important thing is that I'm going to keep pretty much all of the compulsory education years 0 to years 11 or year 11 unchanged in terms of like that whole like key stage structure, primary school, secondary school thing. However, I do want to talk about a change I would make to the structure of the school year. And basically, in the UK, we have these things called terms. So basically the year is divided into 3 terms with holidays in between. So you have the autumn term, and then you have your Christmas break, then you have the spring term, then you have your Easter break, then you have your summer term, followed by your summer break. That's the system. And also in between that, you have half terms. So you have a half term break in the middle of all of your different terms. Now, here's the big change I would make. Currently, these half terms vary quite widely in length. So basically, at least when I was at school, and I think this is quite consistent, you had an 8-week half term, followed by 7 weeks, followed by 6 weeks, followed by 6 weeks, followed by 6 weeks, followed by 5 weeks. So this meant that your autumn term was 15 weeks long, while your summer term was only 11 weeks long. And I want to make a pretty simple change, which is make every single half term 7 weeks long, and make half terms the kind of main sort of building block of the school year. So you've got, and in that case, they probably shouldn't really be called half terms anymore, because they would now be the main referent. So it wouldn't really make sense to call them half something because they're the main thing, rather than them being defined with reference to the wider, 3 terms that you get each year. Now, it should be said that this would mean less holiday because, of course, 7 times 6 is bigger than what else I just said, 8 plus 7 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 5. But I'll just explain how I imagine the holidays being broken down. Basically, you would only get 2 one-week half-term holidays in the autumn term and the summer term. So no half-term holiday in the spring term. And the reason for that is to make the Christmas holiday, which would be a 2-week break, and the Easter holiday, which would be a 2-week break, work. And I was kind of thinking, I know Easter moves around a bit, and I was kind of thinking actually that it's possible that the 1-week half term would move between either spring or summer, depending on when Easter is, because obviously it makes sense for Easter itself to fall during the Easter 2-week holiday break. But so far, that's only a loss of 1 week holiday. The big loss comes from the summer. So in the UK right now, you get 6 weeks of summer holiday. Instead, you would get 4 weeks of summer holiday. And I've heard this is what they have in China. In China, they don't have that many holidays. And I've heard this is a good thing because actually, like, giving children a huge extended period of time where they're not expected to do any schoolwork at all actually is just quite bad for their brains, because it's like they're not really using their brains for like that whole period. And I think in America they have even more than 6 weeks. Like, I mean, I know one time in The Simpsons, Otto's like, yeah, 3 whole months of holiday. And I don't know if that's really how much holiday Americans have, but yeah, from what I've heard, obviously I know that's not how many holiday American workers have, but if that's how much holiday American students have. But I've heard that's like the worst thing, because basically, yeah, your mind's not engaged at all. And the best thing in terms of, teaching kids is not to give them too much holiday, because then they just turn off their brain. But obviously you don't want to be too mean. You don't want to like dramatically increase the amount of schoolwork they would do. So to compensate for this, at my school, you had 6 lessons a day. I think instead you should have 5 lessons a day, making for 25 lessons a week. Now, you might be asking, what's the point of this? And there's one very big point. Apart from just the general thing I just said about how having less holiday I think works better, it also allows for a greater standardization, which actually allows for greater variability. And the reason for that is because all modules could get equivalent amount of time dedicated to them. In other words, every single module could have 7 lessons or 7 weeks worth of stuff to learn about within it. See, the thing is, right now, there is that kind of variability in that teachers can kind of choose. You have, for example, a set amount of modules you need to learn in each subject. And of course, I mean, that makes sense. Otherwise, you wouldn't learn anything. There are certain things you need to do. If you're doing English, for example, you need to do a Shakespeare module. You need to do a kind of modern literature module. There's different modules you can do. But the thing is, and this is a very key point, the teachers not only can kind of choose what modules they can do, but they're also not really expected to teach a particular module at a particular time. So they might teach a module in the autumn term, or they might teach a module in the summer term. But you'll notice the issue there, which is that in the autumn term, there are 15 weeks of lessons. In the summer term, there are only 11, which means either in the autumn term, kids doing, let's say, for example, the Shakespeare module are having an extra 4 weeks that's completely unnecessary and completely wasted, or in the summer term, the kids doing the Shakespeare module are missing out on 4 weeks of lessons they desperately need. The issue is because you have this variability, and this was something I always thought about when I was at school, because I was aware that different classes in, for example, English, were doing different modules and different units at different times. And I was thinking to myself, that doesn't really work though, because that means that, like the people doing it in autumn are getting way more lessons on this topic. So whenever I was sat, whatever modules we were doing in autumn, I was always thinking to myself, those extra 4 weeks we're getting, do we really need them? Because the people who are going to be doing this exact same unit in the summer, they're not getting these extra 4 weeks. So it seems like it must be unnecessary. And then, of course, when I was in the summer term, I was thinking, those extra 4 weeks we're not getting to do this unit, do we need them? Because the people who were doing this unit in autumn have got that extra 4 weeks. So do we need it or do we not? It just seems like it's completely wasted. So the point is, when I say it allows for standardization, it allows for basically you to say every single module has 7 weeks worth of stuff to learn. And indeed, if the module is extended over more than one, say, for example, to the whole term rather than just a half term, for example, you would say it would take 14 weeks, every single module. And that standardization actually allows for more variability, because now it doesn't matter where you place that module, it doesn't matter when and where you're learning about it, you can still learn just as much as everybody else. So you're not disadvantaging a particular cohort by where you decide to teach each class. So I was like, yes, that seems like a good addition, little change to make. Anyway, now let's actually talk about the subjects. And this is going to be, there was a logic to how this kind of progresses. So just enjoy, and we'll see how much it ends up sounding like complete stream of consciousness. So number one, let's start with the subject of maths. So I've got a few points I want to make about maths, and this is going to be the first point. First point, by the way, if you're American, you call it math. I'm not somebody who, in this case, I'm not a prescriptivist. I know some people will be like, it's mathematics with an S on the end, therefore it should be maths. But there are examples where that's inconsistent. So ultimately, if you call it math, you call it math. I call it maths. Neither is objectively incorrect. But yeah, here's the main point I want to make about maths, apart from that, which is maths teachers are kind of pointless. Basically, one of the things I want to talk about is not just kind of what subject should be taught, but also how each subject should be taught. And one of the things that's worth considering there is kind of the role of teachers and how important teachers are. And I will say that when I first started kind of thinking about curriculum reform, it was mostly in terms of kind of like thinking about wasted resources. That was like my first thing. And, I like to think that I have some consideration for when resources are being wasted and how to organize resources more efficiently. And something I was thinking about is, when do you actually need teachers? Because teachers cost a lot of money. They command quite high wages in the UK. I know in America they hardly get any money at all. But the point is, it's something the government has to spend money on. And I was thinking, well, how often do we need teachers? And to me, it's obvious that we don't really need teachers for maths. And there's one very good reason for this, and it's because maths fans of maths will like to brag about how objective maths is. They say, oh, maths, there's one correct answer, there's one truth, it's a pure truth. Like everything, there's no ambiguity to it. It's 100% just completely objective. And that's a very, fine thing to brag about. It's certainly nice that you can say, yes, there's just an unambiguous truth to 2 + 2 = 4, in a way where there might not be a truth to, for example, a certain historical claim or, philosophical claim. Like, of course, you might not say that those things are as obviously or even as objectively true. But the issue here is that with maths being so objective, why do you need a teacher to teach it? Because here's the thing, okay, it makes sense why you need a teacher to teach you English literature, for example, because that teacher is going to have their own presentation and their own take on what it is they're teaching. The issue is that a maths teacher shouldn't have their own take on basic mathematical truth. In fact, a maths teacher only has one job, and that is to just communicate to students a basic truth, like literally an undeniable basic truth. That's it. They're basically, in some sense, kind of robots, right? Because the only thing they can add to their job, the only thing they can add to the subject is unnecessary. There's nothing there which they need to add, because essentially all their job is to do is say, yep, this is the truth, and it's just, just learn this truth. There's no reason for them to be there, is there? And especially seeing as, and you might say, well, some maths teachers are really fantastic and can really teach stuff great. And there are maths teachers who clearly are really good at communicating this stuff. But here's the thing, right? Lots of maths teachers aren't really great at communicating this stuff. After all, the only reason a maths teacher is there is because they understand this basic truth. But why does understanding a basic truth reflect the ability to communicate that truth to other people? It might not necessarily. Indeed, a lot of maths teachers are going to have been people who are naturally gifted at maths, right? So maybe they will be uniquely incapable of communicating these things to people who aren't naturally gifted at maths. So it seems like you're setting the system up where you're going to be having this stuff being taught at best, or maybe not at best, but taught quite consistently by people who are not going to be uniquely qualified to present this information. They're aware of this information, but anybody can be aware of this information because it's just objective truth. The ability to communicate that information is no considerable merit, really, when it's just obvious fact. And here's the thing, if you're going to say, well, there are some people who are uniquely good at communicating this information, well, then what we should do is we should just have those people have like YouTube channels and just show those videos to people. And this brings me to the fact that, of course, you can learn maths from kind of a computer program. And when I was at school, there was a website called some kind of maths. I can't remember what it was. It might have been called Smart Maths. And we would actually have to do, for example, our homework on it. So we would have to log on to the website and complete a series of exercises. And the issue is, why even have the maths class then, right? And indeed, eventually they started to kind of take this to almost its logical conclusion, because we were doing all of this. This was like our homework. We would learn the kind of maths thing, and then we would have to go home, log on to the maths site, and do the maths homework. Eventually, when they got a computer suite for the maths department, you would each week, one class, or rather, one of your lessons each week would be in the computer suite. And on the computer suite, what would you do? You would just log on to, this website and just complete mathematical exercises. That was it. That was all you did. And you realize, actually, if you just added kind of some little introductory videos to each of the different exercises, you don't need the teacher there at all. Like if you're thinking of somebody who's a very fantastic maths teacher, and certainly, there are some fantastic maths teachers, imagine that they're just being filmed in a classroom explaining this mathematical concept, and you can just click on that video, load it up, watch it, and then just complete the maths exercises. And to be honest, when I was in A-level, I was really struggling with maths. I just couldn't make it work in my head. And eventually I thought, you know what? I'm just going to mostly focus on when I get home, I'm going to get the exercise book, read the explanation, and then just do the exercises and try and work my way through all of them just from the book. And guess what? It was no more difficult than actually trying to pay attention in the maths lesson was harder, right? And this is another really important point, which is that for me, one of the issues with maths is that as soon as you don't pay attention for a second, you miss something really important. Like with maths, it's kind of like, I can understand it as long as I follow it step by step. But if I miss a step because I just, get distracted for a second, I'm completely lost. And I found that happening all the time in my maths classes. And if I just had a video explaining the thing that I could go back to, I would have understood it. And that's why when I decided to actually start teaching myself maths by looking at the exercise books and just reading the explanation rather than trying to listen to a teacher, I started doing dramatically better. And that's it. So and obviously that was reading. That was kind of annoying, to be honest. It's a bit, reading, it's a bit slow. It would have been even more efficient if I just had, like I say, a program open, and basically the program's divided into two things. One, a kind of video hosting platform, which can teach you all of the maths. And of course it can teach you all of the maths. And then two, a program for completing exercises. And of course, I think that would help everybody. And of course, it would save money. You wouldn't need maths teachers. Maths teachers can just stop existing, frankly. But also, you'll notice it would allow, for example, the really skilled kids to get super far ahead. There's nobody has to be held back in this system by other people being slower. Everyone can kind of go at their own pace. And that's kind of how I think maths should work. I just think maths teachers, I don't think they have a point. I just think maths should be a bunch of students, every single maths class should just be a computer suite, and just kids should sit there. They can watch whatever videos. And of course, if they're really struggling, they can do it at home. If they really want to do well, they can do it at home and just keep working at it. There's no reason why they have to just work on it in their maths class. Obviously, you should have a maths class so you can guarantee kids are working on it at least a little bit. But if they want to work on it more, they can work on it more. Like basically it just allows for all sorts of variability. And I don't really see the point in like the maths class as it currently exists. I think it's completely pointless. Now, if you thought that me saying that maths teachers basically shouldn't exist is controversial, then strap in, because things are about to get a lot more intense. I kind of don't really think that maths should be taught to primary school children, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. I think it should be taught a little bit, but not very much. And this is something where I could be totally off base. I might be completely wrong. But my experience of maths was that I feel like most of the maths I learned was after the age of 11. And up until the age of 11, I feel like I learned some very basic stuff. Like I learned basic arithmetic, some fraction stuff, some very basic algebra. But the thing is, what you have to realize is that I did 5 maths lessons a day when I was at primary school. Sorry, that's not true. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I did 1 maths lesson a day, equaling 5 maths lessons a week. 5 maths lessons a day would be a lot. 5 maths lessons a week. For 7 years. From year 0 to year 7. Sorry, no, from year 0 to year 6. 7 years of, that's kind of funny actually, that I'm talking about maths. And I feel like I really didn't learn that much. And by contrast, in the 5 years afterwards, where I actually only had, in secondary school, I only had 4 maths lessons a week. I feel like I learned a huge amount. I learned trigonometry, all this stuff. And what does that tell you? Well, to me, it kind of suggests that children aren't actually that good at learning maths. And this isn't I wasn't that good at learning maths. Like, it must be children in general, because if like you kind of have all of the first 7 years, 5 lessons a week, and you just learn the very basics, and then suddenly it's like, you start learning trigonometry, very complicated. By year 8, only 2 years after I left primary school, I feel like I'd learned a huge amount. And it leads me to the conclusion, I don't think children psychologically are that good at learning maths. And I think that actually you could get away with not teaching really any maths at all to primary school students, and they wouldn't actually miss out on that much. I think that, to be honest, just young children aren't good at learning maths. And therefore, like basic arithmetic, I think they might just learn naturally anyway. And then everything else, you can kind of just like teach them almost like a crash course. And I think that would actually work better. And I do think that obviously, you should kind of have some math stuff going on. I think you should kind of teach kids some of like the basics, dedicate a really quite small amount of the school time to it. And also have like kind of tests every now and then, just to kind of find the young mathematical geniuses. Because like I do agree there are like kids who are just like mathematical geniuses even at the age of 4. And of course those kids should really get like a lot of attention paid to maths, and they're clearly able to do it. But the fact that, again, I'm not talking about my personal experience, I'm talking about the curriculum itself is so limited for the first 7 years, and then suddenly just takes off like nobody's business, seems to suggest to me that actually there's not much point in those first 7 years. And here's the thing, okay? I think maths is really important. I really do. I think maths matters. You might think that I'm down on maths, and obviously you probably know that I'm not so great at maths, but I'm not such kind of a narcissist that I think that my personal experience of things should completely determine how everybody else is taught. However, the thing is, I kind of feel like other people, because I'm not saying that because I don't like maths, therefore it shouldn't be taught lots. There are actually other subjects I don't like, which I think should be taught a huge amount. The thing is, I think other people are going the opposite way around. I think lots of other people are saying, well, maths is a really important subject, therefore we should teach a huge amount of it. And I don't know if that's true. Like I think people are saying, well, maths is really important, so we need to teach young children 5 lessons of maths a week. But if those young children aren't learning that much, are we actually achieving anything? I actually really do think that it's a lot of wasted effort based on this idea of, well, we should teach them maths. But I don't think it's actually teaching most children that much. And the thing is, shockingly, I actually do think that even though I don't think that Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 should really be taught very much maths, I think that it's possible that children could be expected to actually progress faster with maths under my system anyway. And one of the reasons for that is, like I say, because of course I think that it's just more efficient, the kind of computer way. But the other thing is, I think that more effort needs to be put into like knowledge retention, because I think I learned trigonometry about 3 times in over the course of like my history doing maths, and every time it felt like I was learning it from scratch. And I thought to myself, I mean, for me personally, and again, obviously, the fact that this was my experience of the actual curriculum suggests this was something which other kids experienced too. Like it wasn't as if when we learned trigonometry for like the 3rd time, everyone just suddenly went, "Oh no, I already know all of this off by heart." No, like lots of other people like learning again, even though we'd already learned it in like year 7 and year 9. When we were again learning it in year 11, it was like, "Oh, let me take notes on this." But I like found myself kind of like taking notes and I'm thinking like, I swear 2 years ago I could do this. And there must be a more efficient way to retain this information. And I don't know exactly what it would be. I think like probably the best thing would be kind of, one of the issues is it's kind of like you learn a particular thing and then you just move on to something else. So you learn trigonometry. I think like the issue with maths, and again, this kind of comes back to the objectivity thing. What's the one thing that like is parodied to death about the American education system? The standardized tests where it's just you like learn, you basically learn to the test. That's one of the things which of course is very kind of maligned about particularly American education. You learn to the test, you learn everything you need to learn for the test, you get it all done, and then you just forget it. It's not about teaching kids to think and understand and learn about the world. It's about teaching kids what to do in tests. I think that maths is really seriously plagued with that problem, like more so than any other subject. And one of the reasons is because some of the topics are so niche, and also because the answers are so objective, that it is kind of like you learn a formula and then you use that formula to do the test. And, once you've got the correct answers in the test, you don't need it anymore, Like that's the thing. I learned trigonometry and it's kind of like, it's shocking to me that I got an A in maths. I do remember I got an A in maths. And it's shocking because I think if you gave me that test now, I would get like a D, maybe an F. Like I would not get a good grade in that test if you gave it to me now. And it's because, I learned all of this stuff, but then you just kind of forget it. And I think, yeah, that's kind of a really big issue, I think, with maths. I think the solution is kind of to treat maths a little bit like language, in terms of like when people are learning a language, they will often kind of, you learn like things topic by topic, but then you'll do refresher courses where you kind of like learn, like you'll kind of go back and you'll use some of the vocabulary you've already learned and you'll kind of reincorporate it. And I think that's something which really people need with maths. I think that's like and this again, finally I've kind of stopped ragging on maths, being like, oh, get rid of the maths teachers, get rid of the maths lessons. Here, I really think it would be a good thing if like you, of course, learn new stuff, you learn new modules, but every now and then you kind of have refresher courses where you just kind of like, and it will be, you redo some of the stuff you learned recently. So, maybe at the, you do trigonometry, and then rather than waiting 2 years to do trigonometry again, during which point you maybe did the test where you had to learn trigonometry and then you just forgot it, you maybe do it even just after the next module. You go back and you do trigonometry again. I think that would be a much better system. And I would even support, based on the fact that I think quite possibly by having this thing where you don't just relearn things again and again and again, so you can just do it in the test and then forget it, we might be able to expand the curriculum. And I would like the idea of kind of a philosophy and history of maths course, which, funnily enough, would be the only maths course which would actually require teachers, because like philosophy of maths, of course, would require teachers. What are numbers? What functions do they perform? What is the kind of deeper reality of a mathematical equation? These are interesting questions. Unfortunately, these are questions which I think probably couldn't actually be taught by maths teachers. They'd probably have to be taught by philosophy teachers. But yeah, I think that, so again, sorry, maths teachers. But no, yeah, I really do think like that would be a great thing to kind of see added to the mathematical syllabus. So that's kind of my thoughts on maths. Again, I should stress, you might be freaking out. Not all, it's not as if every other subject is going to be this long, but yeah, basically, no teachers, mostly learning it from kind of computer program stuff, and like doing it kind of online, basically. You don't really need to learn it as much when you're a kid. You just get like a few kind of like just kind of, I guess, like check in like every now and then. Just like, okay, just to remind you, basic arithmetic. And, I expect that you would see kids get better at it just because I think naturally kids will learn it. And then eventually, yeah, kids will learn all sorts of stuff and they'll like really start to get involved in maths and really kind of start to, I guess, appreciate maths on a deeper level rather than just learning to the test. But I don't think kids who are that young are that great at learning maths. Now, that's a really good segue because the next thing I want to talk about is language. And the big reason, because you might say, well, why do I want to cut maths and what do I want to replace it with? Well, if you're thinking, what am I saying? What's my whole argument now? I don't think kids are that good at learning maths. I don't think their brains are kind of tuned for it. But what are young children's brains incredibly good at? What do we know they're good at? Learning languages. So I actually think that in essence, Key Stage 1 should almost exclusively be for language. Like it almost exclusively. I think that it wouldn't be unrealistic to imagine that children leaving Key Stage 1 would be able to speak 6 or 7 languages. And that's because, like kids are very good at learning languages, like more efficient than obviously adults. And also, basically, I think that 60% of the time in Key Stage 1 should be dedicated to learning languages. And that translates to 1,890 hours so basically that's mostly achieved by cutting down maths considerably. So kids get almost 2,000 hours to dedicate to this thing that children are incredibly good at learning, that young children are very good at picking up. And, I think this is a radical contrast to the, 2,000 hours that we would otherwise spend trying to drill maths into their head, which I don't think they'd be anything like as good at picking up. But yeah, the reality is I think, 6, 7 languages. And I kind of have like opinions on what languages it would make sense to teach kids. Obviously, I think that kind of nearby European languages make sense. The kind of like religious person in me really likes the idea of kids having the option of learning biblical Hebrew and Koine Greek, like kind of languages that would help them with stuff like that. And my kind of very controversial take is I kind of like the idea of kids learning Latin. And one of the reasons for that is because, as you will know, if you've seen me talk about education before, I'm a firm believer in the idea that education should be about education being a virtue in itself, rather than serving any utility. I don't think that people should need to ask, why is this information useful? I think people should be able to say, oh, information is just kind of intrinsically good, and knowing stuff is intrinsically good. And learning a dead language coheres with that philosophy. Now, having said that, there is actually utility to Latin, obviously. You can study the classics if you know Latin, but the other thing you can do, of course, is it helps to learn other Romance languages. So it does have a function. And based on that, actually, considering the fact that I'm saying like children might be learning French and Spanish, yeah, actually learning Latin is quite good because it's like a building block of lots of other languages. So yeah, I wouldn't be against children learning Latin at all. And I think that would be kind of fun, which I know is kind of an antiquated thing, but I'm here for it. Now, I obviously do think that teachers should have a role in teaching language, but also programs like Duolingo make it very clear that for a huge amount of kind of learning languages, teachers are kind of unnecessary. And I think a lot of the time the teachers could sort of just be glorified babysitters who put on like a TV show or some kind of educational thing in a different language. Like the reality is that obviously I'm talking about very young children here. What's the main way they're going to be learning language? You're going to put on like, some kind of Spanish children's TV show, let them absorb it naturally. So I think really this should be something which is kind of in essence quite cheap, because part of it, I think maybe as the kids kind of get towards 6, you can maybe like sit them down with like the iPad and let them kind of play around with it or whatever. But kind of prior to that, I mean, you're just going to have like a teacher talk to students in Spanish, French, German. Basically, yeah, the kids will mostly just be learning language. And obviously, how is it that young kids learn language in the first place? They learn language by listening to people talk. You got to bear in mind that babies, learn English in like a year, 2 years, about 2 years. I'm trying to think about like babies I know, personally. Like, just babies I'm really good friends with. No, like babies I've kind of like met and spoken to and like roughly how old they were. Um, and I think like I know children who are under the age of 2 who can like basically speak English. Obviously they do the adorable little kind of stumbling, stuttering thing, which is just so cute. But no, yeah, like they can speak English, and they're like clearly a lot of the time. I think well, something I've even heard is like a lot of the time kids get frustrated like when they're kind of at that age. I don't know if this is just complete bunk child psychology, but I've heard it. Kids get frustrated. One of the reasons like kind of people talk about like the terrible twos and like children being really angry is because they know what it is they want to say, but their brain language thing is actually at this point less capable than their motor skills. I've heard that, like that basically there's a point in a child's life where they're able to communicate better in their head than they're actually able to communicate with their mouth. So they try to say something and they can't quite say it, and they're like, and that's kind of why they do the whole stuttering thing, and like they can't talk properly. And I've heard that's one reason why like kind of toddlers really start having like proper tantrums and stuff like that, because they're just frustrated at the fact that their brains are like smarter than kind of the muscle part, like their mental skill is more kind of better than their motor skill. And with that said, I mean, that just speaks to the fact these, kids can pick up language really well. Why on earth would we not take advantage of this? There's absolutely no reason not to. We have these children who have this incredible ability to pick up languages so easily. Why are we teaching them maths when we could teach them? And I do actually think that by kind of exercising their brain, like I wonder how different humanity would be if children were taught like 6, 7 languages when they're young. Am I expecting them to retain every single one of those languages? No. Language retention is something which I'll touch on like kind of very much towards the end of this video. Mostly language retention would be kind of an individual responsibility thing. Like if you want your kid to retain the language, show them The Simpsons in Spanish, But and maybe take them on holiday or whatever. But like I don't, I think ultimately the retention of language might be a different thing, but I think that the reality is the amount of kind of just work those neurons are going to get in those kids' heads from learning all this stuff which they're equipped to learn. I think that the consequences of that for like the long-term kind of mental, and like there is the idea, it's somewhat of a kind of speculative idea, but that because different languages kind of train your brain to think about things in different ways, it can open up like different kind of neuron pathways and stuff like that, because of course, different languages have different rules, and actually different rules actually do kind of speak to different ways of thinking about the world. And ultimately, I'm not sure exactly how true that would be, but yeah, it's certainly true that I imagine that the way that you think about speaking English is quite different from the way you might think about speaking Arabic, which could be different from how you think about speaking Chinese, which would be different from how you think about speaking Native American. So if you learn like a quite wide variety of languages, you could be opening up all sorts of different neuron kind of pathways and like different ways of thinking for young children. That could be incredible. And I think, yeah, like that's one thing which I'm very passionate about. But I also want to talk about not just other languages, but this thing called the English language. So I think that children should learn the English language. And it's worth noting, in the UK, there is this weird thing where English language is like a different subject. You have, this is the weird thing about the UK, you have one subject called English, and then arbitrarily kind of in Key Stage 4, it diverges into English language and English literature. And for me, I think that's a kind of fine diversion to have, or like distinction to have, because of course there's a difference between English in terms of how to speak English versus English in terms of reading Shakespeare. They're kind of two different things, really. What I don't really understand is why it is that you only see this difference emerging in Key Stage 4. I would like to extend that difference all the way back and substantiate it. So for me, English language as a subject would basically be how to speak English. And of course, obviously, with the other languages you would learn, the goal would be basic kind of competency. Like, you can just talk okay. But with English, you'd want to be able to speak really well. And yeah, that's why I think English language should just be about how to speak English, like, well. Good. And to be honest, here's the thing. I'll briefly mention kind of prescriptivism and descriptivism. I understand the idea of like some people saying, well, is there really a right way to speak English? Is it kind of objectionable to suggest there is? I do think there's something to be said, and this kind of relates back to the neural pathways thing I was talking about, to having arbitrary rules. Like, I do wonder if it's possible, and again, this is speculative. Some of the stuff I will admit is totally speculative based on like, speculation about child psychology I know nothing about, but I wonder about it, which is whether or not having arbitrary rules about like how to use certain words and stuff like that helps kids' brains work, like helps kids' brains develop and kind of like knowing these different rules and stuff like that helps to keep a part of their brain active that might otherwise not be active. And that's one reason why I think, actually teaching kids, yes, there's a correct way to use the English language. And of course, no one's suggesting completely exclude linguistic things and stuff like that. But, kind of dialectical stuff. But obviously there's like certainly some stuff which is just like a correct way or can be viewed as just a correct way to speak. Now, obviously, kind of starting off, this would mostly be about spelling. And again, that's somewhere I think, you would just say, well, there's just a right way to spell this stuff. But also, I don't think that when it comes to grammar, you should wait until it's too late. There were lots of kind of pretty rudimentary grammatical things, which I only really learned in Key Stage 4. A really good example is the use of colons and semicolons in sentences, which I still don't fully understand, but like we only learned it in year 10. And it's like, so up until that point, we just didn't like this piece of punctuation. We just couldn't use it in a sentence. And that was kind of nonsense when you think about why wouldn't you learn that sooner? But also, I mean, like, to be honest, I feel like some of the stuff, like she and I versus me and her, like I don't think I actually learned that at all. I learned that from my mum. To who versus to whom. Again, I learned that from my mum. Fewer versus less. All of these things, like my mum obviously is about grammar. And to be honest, all of those things I learned from my mum. I don't think I learned them from school. And the thing is, why not just teach them at school, right? Like, I just think that when it comes to that grammar stuff, and also I think grammar is useful in terms of making yourself understood. And yeah, therefore I think like, and I especially think some of the punctuation's like useful. Like I think you can obviously get more sophisticated sentences by using different kinds of punctuation, which is just nice. And it can make things kind of clearer. Like, because you can kind of use a colon in one instance and then maybe use kind of hyphens in another instance and brackets and another thing. And it kind of just makes it easier to kind of delineate and distinguish between like different sorts of asides and like extra clauses and stuff like that. Does to whom really matter? Well, it's kind of nice. Like I like to be able to use whom correctly. And I don't see any problem with it, to be honest. So I think, kids should just learn it and start learning it young. And I do think, obviously, this should eventually progress not just to kind of the boring old rules, but also using the English language in different kind of ways of using the English language. So obviously there's kind of like learning formal writing, casual writing, descriptive writing, the different kind of ways that the English language can be used. And of course, what you can do there is you can kind of break, therefore, kind of the teaching of English language down into modules involving the different styles. But as you're doing that, you can kind of learn spelling and grammar as you're going along. So, young kids could, I think one of the very common things is, I certainly did this. It's a very hilariously British thing. You learn to write how to make a cup of tea. And that's one of the things which I definitely learned. So it's, and you've kind of got to, write it. It's basically teaching about like kind of writing to inform. It's like, how would you tell somebody how to make a cup of tea? And basically teaching. And this is something you learn when I think I was in Key Stage 2. I think I was about 8 when I remember doing this. And it's basically learning. You can use it's a quite a rudimentary thing, but it's worth teaching. You can use the English language to tell people things, tell people what to do and how to do it. I think that's very much worth teaching kids, like the different ways you can use language, different ways to employ language. Obviously, like formal versus informal, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, at the same time, you can do, all the other stuff. Now, this would definitely need teachers in terms of like assessing the quality of what students are producing, because computers, very famously, are not fantastic at grammar. The computers can't do so great at grammar. However, also, even worse, of course, would be a computer trying to assess like the quality of prose. Like, I don't know if I think a human being has like a good ability to recognize when something is being written well versus not so well. And I can read something and think, oh, this wasn't written very well. I don't think a computer would be able to do that. So you definitely need teachers in terms of saying like, well, here's where you went wrong and here's where to improve. You use this word, but actually this word would kind of make it work better. That's definitely something teachers could do. But spelling, by contrast, I think is something which could easily be kind of automated. And I think maybe you could make an argument like, I'm saying you should kind of incorporate the spelling with the other stuff. You could have it so it's kind of like every single English language lesson, kids kind of come in and they sit down and they have like, an iPad or some kind of tablet. And basically they just do they got a little app thing and they just do, oh, here's my spelling. And then, maybe they do that for 10 minutes, see how many you get right. Whoever, maybe does the best gets a little kudos. And then you say, okay, iPad's in. Today we're going to be learning how to tell somebody to make a cup of tea, or how to tell somebody how to make a cup of tea. Telling somebody to make a cup of tea is a bit demanding of you. But yeah, the other thing here, and this is the only time we're going to mention this. Oh, no, it's not actually. I'm lying. Is assessment, kind of tests. Admittedly, for maths test, it's pretty intuitive. Language test, pretty intuitive, If you want to know whether somebody can speak a language, we all know how to test. You say this in French, and then if they say it in French, they've got a mark. For maths, solve what x is on this shape, knowing these various sides. If they're able to solve what x is, then they get a mark. For this, there's one thing I want to stress, which is I don't think there should even be English language tests. And we're not talking like kind of Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2. We're talking like kind of going into secondary school. But rather, for every single test you do, you should get a separate English language grade. So basically, when you write your history test, if you use good grammar, good spelling, all that kind of stuff, so basically, obviously, you get your history grade. Your history grade is based entirely on your knowledge of history. That's it. That's the only thing you're being graded on. But after that, then your test gets read by an English language examiner, and they say, oh, what's the actual quality of this writing? And they give you a grade based on that. And the reason I say this is because it's in contrast to our current system, where you have one test where your use of the English language is assessed. And then in every other test, you are explicitly told that spelling and grammar doesn't matter. This is it makes sense, again, because obviously if somebody really understands history, then their grade in the history test should be based on that, and they shouldn't suffer because their grammar or spelling is bad. But the issue is that it basically creates a situation where they don't even need to try a tool to have a good, to have good spelling and grammar in their history test. If their spelling and grammar is completely crap, as long as it's not so crap that it means the person can't even tell what they're trying to say, they could still get a very high grade. The point is, I think they should still get a very high grade in history, but the fact that they're not using the English language well should count against them as far as the English language. And again, I just think the current system is very weird, because if you're going to grade kids on their use of the English language in a test to test their ability to use the English language, and then admit at the same time, oh, but in every other test you do, spelling and grammar literally does not matter one bit. I think that's kind of nonsense, no, basically, for any kind of essay subject, no, spelling and grammar should be regarded as mattering. And that's my take on English language. But I said that English diverges into English language and English literature. So what about English literature? Well, here's the thing. I don't think there should be a subject called English literature. Rather, to be honest, I think that English language should just be referred to as English, and the English literature should be combined with a subject which is generally considered a bit, of a joke subject, which is media studies. But I think these two should be combined into literature and media. That's what I think. I think it should be a core subject alongside maths and English and science, literature and media. The reason I say that is because, like I already said, I think these two subjects should be established in terms of their difference, because the current system is really weird, because it's like I say, it starts off with just English as one thing, and then it kind of diverges into English language and English literature, but you still have the one subject of English. It's just you have two grades, English language and English literature. What's weird is that they kind of weirdly kind of interface, where you, some of them you get a proportion of your mark goes to your English literature grade and a proportion goes to the English language grade. It's all very weird and confusing. Also, you have, at least when I was at school, you studied a film. So when I was at school, we actually studied Blade Runner. So we watched Blade Runner and we kind of had to talk about what are the themes of Blade Runner, all that kind of stuff. We had to kind of assess the quality of it as a piece of media. And the weird thing about that is that it wasn't literature. So was it English language? But is that English? It was a bit weird. And that's why I just think it's simpler to just say literature and media. I just think keep it as a separate thing. So it's you have your English language where you learn to speak English, you learn, the basic way to use the English language. And then you have literature and media, which is when you look at literature and media. Very, very simple. And of course, I'm not going to get too much into the syllabus, but what is literature and media? It's poetry, great novels, films, plays. And it's, literature and media that is of some significance to contemporary society. So of course, we all know, you read Huckleberry Finn. If you're in America, in the UK, we did read Of Mice and Men. I'm quite resentful of the fact, I say of significance to Western society, I'm quite resentful of the fact we read some random book called Heroes, which is not a famous great novel. I kind of feel like, having come out of literature, English literature, I should have read a classic, but I didn't. I read this random book. No, I did read actually a classic. I read A Christmas Carol, which was honestly, it was one of my favorite memories of my childhood. And I say childhood, I was a teenager. I was 15, 14. And we stayed. It just so happened that we were staying. Okay, I'll add a little bit extra to this story just to spice it up. So I had in year 9, I had an English teacher who hated me. She just hated me, and I don't know why. And the consequence of that is I was in the B set so basically they're marked by how good. So the A set is the best set, it's for the best students. Then there's B set, C set, D set, E set. And I think that's as far as it goes. So I was in the B set. I was in the B set for almost everything. Interestingly, I was in the A set for maths, but then they created the A star set for maths. So literally, I kind of find it hilarious. In every single subject, I was in the second best set, the B set. And then the one subject where I finally got up to the A set, literally that year, they created the A star set. And the A star set was for super kind of mathematical kids. But yeah, so I was in the B set for English, but I got knocked down to the C set. And it meant that when I was in doing my GCSE in English, what I realized is actually you got a lot of help in the C set, which was good because I was not a C set student. So I was basically had kind of the, I don't know if this is, I want to say natural intelligence. I don't really want to say an intelligence that felt somewhat innate to me, I'll say, of a B set student, but I was getting all of the help of a C set student. So I ended up getting just the most insane grades ever. And very quickly, within a term, I got pushed back up to the B set. They're oh, well, you clearly should not be here. Go up to the B set. But the thing is, because of the fact that, I mentioned at the beginning of this video, different English teachers will do different modules at different times. When I got up there, they'd already done a different set from what I was doing. They'd already done one. And therefore, they'd already read A Christmas Carol. And I hadn't read, I hadn't done the equivalent unit in the C set. So I was okay, I've got to read the Christmas Carol. And they decided I would do it over the summer because I was like, well, you don't want to do it now because you're already busy doing your own work, so do it over the summer. Anyway, and then that summer we went to a British seaside town, and we happened to. This is going to sound incredibly bougie, and it's not reflective of my average summer. But we were in a very big house by this. It was on a cliff overlooking the sea. And admittedly, it would have been better if I was reading Treasure Island or something like that, which I also did read and I loved it. But I read A Christmas Carol, and it was just like, it was the coziest thing. Like, you have no idea. I would sit there, like, my room was on the top floor. I'd sit there kind of, curled up by the windowsill with a little light on, reading this like old antiquated book. Fans of the channel know I love me an antiquated book. And I could just like look out over the cliff, like onto the beach and onto the sea. And it was just the most like idyllic thing ever. Anyway, point is that despite having read Christmas Carol and really liked it, the other book we read was a bit like, what the hell's this? Like, it wasn't a bad book. It's just like, if I'm going to do like a literature degree, or a literature degree, not literature degree, a literature subject, I would expect to read like a classic of literature. But yeah, I think basically just, obviously there's a lot of kind of choice that can be involved here. Like, there's loads of great films, loads of great plays, loads of great poems, loads of great novels. You could have a pretty, wide variety of different choices. Again, it would have to be films that are genuinely considered great. I know that my friend for his GCSE did Twilight, and it was like about how vampires, like the portrayal of vampires has been changed. So he did, I think, like the maybe even 1930s, or maybe even I might have even done Nosferatu and then Twilight. Because what I did was, see, here's the thing, I did Metropolis and Blade Runner, and the point was like how it was about the depictions of dystopia in films. And that was a really good choice. I was like, yeah, this is great. Like, Metropolis, a classic film. Blade Runner, a classic film. Both really good films. And yes, they both depict dystopia. It was really, really interesting. And I just kind of feel sorry that somebody had to do, okay, Nosferatu, yes, a classic film. But then Twilight, and it was about like how vampires, I don't know, yeah. That's, I think like things like that shouldn't happen. Like, I think basically you just need to have like a sense of, I mean, I've mentioned before that I think that we kind of just have to say, even though there's not really like, it's hard to say what the objective standard is for good media. I think there's a point at which we kind of just have to arbitrarily assert that there is a standard, an objective standard. And by that standard, some films are good and worth actually being like, yes, let's pay attention to this and look at this and see how good it is. And other films, just ignore them. But yeah, that's kind of it. And I think, obviously you can kind of break it down by genre. You can say, well, we need to have some drama films, comedy films, look at different ways that they work, stuff like that. But yeah, I think like basically the point is people should learn the classics. But I also think, of course, there is, I said that this isn't about identity politics, this kind of video, but I definitely do think there's something to be said for, saying, well, let's look outside of just the traditional Western European canon, look at some of the other stuff. And I think that, there would be a pretty kind of easy sort of syllabus to come up with, which would have like a good kind of option of like, okay, you need to do some films, you need to do some books, but these are different things you can do. And I think it could all work out pretty well. I will say that this is something, this literature and media thing, will start in Key Stage 2, and there would be, in Key Stage 2, 864 hours dedicated to it. This was kind of, I was roughly thinking about like how many you would have each week and stuff like that. And so therefore I worked out some of these kind of numbers. 864 hours is a long time to be reading books, watching films, all that kind of stuff. And, by the time you get to kind of Key Stage 4, because that's only in Key Stage 2, I couldn't be able to work out Key Stage 3. But by the time you get to Key Stage 4, actually, no, I might be lying. That might be Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 is 864 hours. But by the time you get to Key Stage 4, there's an option to kind of increase the amount of time you spend on it. So like if you're really into literature and media, you can increase the amount you look at it. If you don't really care, you can reduce it. Makes sense. Put a pin in that you can increase things once you get to Key Stage 4. But also, again, I think there's kind of like, in terms of the utility of teachers, there's kind of a bit of a hybrid thing going on. You don't really need a fully qualified English teacher there when the kids are just reading a book or watching a film. You know, watching a film is the kind of thing that would make sense for the kids to do when there's a substitute teacher, you know. But you know, what you could do, for example, is have like a trainee teachers thing. Like there's a trainee English teacher. They could be in charge of those things where it's just, you just sit there and read the book. But what I do think you would want a kind of proper teacher for is the discussing of kind of themes, or, you know, like actually talking about what's the quality of this piece of media or literature. What does it mean? What's it saying? That kind of stuff. And I think that a good, again, I'll mention assessments because I think this is an interesting thing, that a good final project for this literature and media thing would be for children to produce a substantial review of one piece of literature or media, exploring kind of themes and characterization and all of that stuff. And like very much kind of a free-for-all. I think this would be a great opportunity to have like a lot of kind of options. Like you can just, obviously you might limit yourself, you know, if you go for a film that's rubbish, well, you're not going to be able to explore as much about what makes it good. But yeah, I think this would be like a really, you know, and you know, you'd have to kind of work. Obviously, you might say, well, watching a film seems a lot easier than kind of just reading a whole novel. And yeah, I think you'd have to kind of work it out. So like whichever thing you pick, whether you say, and obviously a poem is very short. You might say, well, I want to work on a poem. You know, you'd have to kind of work it out. And it might be the case that everyone actually does a book, a play, a film, and a poem. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think basically I like that idea of kind of just like the only thing that the kind of student has to do is just write a review of this thing. And there's kind of not so much guidelines, but just like a free-for-all. Like if you want to say why you think that this is quality and explore what this is saying, then go for it. So yeah, I like that. Hey guys, so I wasn't planning on doing this until I realized how long it was getting. This is going to be divided into 2 parts. So this is the end of part 1. I'm going to arbitrarily cut it here. It probably wasn't a natural ending, but that's what I'm ending it here because it was a long video.